Hello, my name is Todd Miranda, and the purpose of this presentation is to demonstrate how to inherit styles using the Based On property. Let's begin by creating a new WPF Windows application project, and we'll call this Based On. The purpose of styles is to separate the look and feel of a control from the control itself in your XAML code, to make the XAML code a little bit more readable and more easily maintainable, because it's easy to go back and change a style and have that style affect multiple controls at once, as opposed to having to go to each and every control. We're going to look at how to take your styles and make your styles easier as well. So let's begin by creating some column definitions, and we'll set the width to auto, and we're going to have two of these. We're only going to have one row, and since we only have one row, we're not going to specify row definitions. We'll use the default fact that there will be a default single row. So in our first column, let's have a list box, and that list box might have a width of 200 and a height of 150. And it'll be located in the first column. It's 0 based, so our first column is column 0. And we will add some list box items, and we'll have one that is item 1, and we'll have a few of these. So we'll have item 2, item 3, item 4, and item 5. And let's vertically align our list box to the top in case our other column is a little wider or a little taller. And then for our second column, let's put this in the second column. We'll have a stack panel. Its orientation will be vertical, and we'll vertically align it to the top as well. And in our stack panel, let's have some buttons. So we'll have a button for add, and we'll have a button for edit and delete as well. Okay, so this is a typical little bit of a piece of a user interface where you've got a list box with some items in it, and then we've got some buttons down the side of that list box to be able to act on the particular selected item in the list box. So now we want to style those elements. So we'd come in here and we'd create a margin here of 0203. Maybe we want a foreground of red and a font size of 18. And we want that to be the same for all of our items. So we can come in and apply the same style to all of our items. And likewise, we'd come down here to our button, and we want the foreground of our button to be dark blue, and maybe the background of our button to be a light blue. And maybe we want the font size to be 16. Okay, so we'll take that set of styles, we'll apply it to each of our buttons. Okay, so we have our snippet of our UI here with our list box and our buttons, and we've styled those. You can imagine in a very complex user interface, these styles would get very unwieldy. So we want to use some resources to define our styles and then be able to apply those styles to our elements using just resources. So let's create a window.resources section, and in our window.resources section we're going to create some styles. So we'll create a style. We're going to give this a key value that we'll be able to reference this with, and we'll call this LB1 for list box 1. Alright. We'll have a setter, and the property will be margin. Value will be our values from down below. And since we don't want to have to specify what type of element this is within each property, let's go ahead and set a target type. And we're going to set a target type of list box item. And this means that this style will only be able to apply to list box items. So we don't have to specify list box item dot margin here. It'll know that it's a list box item and be able to apply the correct margin property. So let's create another setter for another one of our properties, and this will be our foreground property, and its value obviously will be red. And then we've got another property that we had set below font size, and its value we set to 18. So now that we've created this style, given it a name, instead of having to specify it down here in line, we can specify that our style comes from a static resource and specify the name of the static resource. And we can do this for each of our list box items. So this makes our code here in the XAML down with our controls much cleaner, much easier to read, much shorter, because we've effectively moved our styles up here to our resources section. So let's do the same thing with our button style, and we'll give this a key value of add button, and we'll specify its target type as button. So if we had not specified our target type of button, we could come in here and do button dot background. But since we did specify our target type and we're very specific with where our style is going to be applied, we could just use background. And I think I made our background light blue. And we had one additional setter with our property value of foreground, and I believe we made that dark blue. So there's our style for add button. Now notice we've got a few different buttons here, and we may not want them all to be styled the same. So let's go in and apply our first style here. Static resource add button. But what if we wanted each of our buttons to be slightly different? Well, we could create a style for each one of those and reference the style down here in our button. Still much easier to read, and it keeps your styles separated from your actual control. So we'll create a style for delete button and a style for edit button. Okay, we'll copy our add button and make our edit button and our delete button. Now let's say that we wanted the background of some of our other buttons or the foreground of some other buttons to be slightly different. For our delete button, maybe we want our foreground to be red, and our edit button, maybe we want that to be green. And perhaps we'll go with a dark green. Okay, so this allowed us to change the look and feel of our button without having to go down to our button code, because we simply set the style properties up here in our resources section. So let's take a look at what this looks like. Let's build and run it. Okay, so here's our list box with our items that have our margin, the foreground of red. You can see the font size is slightly larger. And if you look over to our buttons, you see that we've got the light blue background on each of them, but the dark blue text and the green text and the red text, respectively, for the buttons, because we had set those in the style. Okay, so we've seen that moving the styles up to our resources section and creating the styles and referencing them down here in our controls makes our lower code much more readable. But what we've really done is we've moved that complexity up to our resources section. So now instead of that complexity just being down below, we've moved the complexity up above. So as a good example of that, let's see what happens if we want to style each of our list box items a little differently. So there's list box item 1, and this would be 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we're going to make some slight changes to these. So 2 would be blue, 3 would be green, 4 might be dark blue, and 5 would be dark green. And then let's change our styles down here to reflect the style that we created for each one of these. Okay, so now we've created some different styles. We've applied those styles to each one of our list elements. And let's see those changes. Okay, so the changes we see were successful. We've got our varying colors that are in our list items. But again, all we did was change the style for each one of the list items, and look at the number of styles that we've got now and the complexity that we have up in our resources section. So as we had said earlier, with those styles being down in our controls section, imagine that we had a very complex UI with many styles, with many elements. You can see how our resources section is going to get very unwieldy. And if we want to change the font size of our list box items, we still have to go to multiple places. We still have to go here and change each one of them individually to 16. So now to change all the list box items, we have to change 5 styles. This is not a whole lot different than just doing it in line in the control. So let's introduce style inheritance. We have our first list box item style, and you see that each subsequent list box item style is very similar except for one minor difference. So instead of duplicating the entire style, let's inherit it. Let's specify a based on property, and the based on property is going to be a static resource, and it's going to be LB1. So we're going to reference the LB1 style and say that this style, LB2, is based on that first style. And what that means is we inherit any elements that are in this first style. We can override any of the elements that are in this style or add to elements that are in this style by simply setting these setters here in this style. So the only thing we're going to override right now is the color, blue, and we're going to do the same thing here. So we'll just cheat and copy that down here. We're going to say that this list box item is based on the first one. As a matter of fact, all of our list box items are based on our first list box item, which means that we can get rid of all these duplicate setter elements. So you can see that we've made that much easier. And we can do the same thing with our buttons because they're very similar. So we'll do based on. And this will be a static resource add button. We're going to move this down to here. So we're going to, the second one is going to inherit from the add button, and the delete button is going to inherit from the add button. And since their backgrounds are the same, we'll be able to remove the background properties from each one of these lower styles. So let's take a look at that. And nothing should have changed in our UI. So you can see there that we've still got the exact same UI, but we have fewer lines of code in our XAML because we've actually used inheritance within our styles. And this is not like OO inheritance. This is just a XAML inheritance concept so that we can inherit styles and then build upon those. So the great thing about this now, not only have we decreased complexity, but if we want all of our buttons to look the same, and since all of our buttons inherit from this first add button, we can go in and create a new setter on the first button, the add button, because this is the one that all of them inherit from. And we can set a margin, and we'll set a margin to, to give some spacing between our buttons. And all we have to do now is add that to our add button, and the other buttons are going to inherit that new value. So let's run this again and take a look at what we've done. Now we've added some nice spacing to our buttons over here. And what's great is, remember that for good user experience, for good user interface standards, anything that's we'll call it a dangerous button, a button that might do negative things, we want to separate a little bit further so we don't accidentally hit our delete button. So add and edit are fairly, we can't mess up a whole lot, but delete, we really want to specify that that's a little bit special. So we can come into our delete button and we can override our margin here and give it a little bit more spacing on the top. So maybe we'll just make that 6 to make it pretty evident that we've changed the spacing there. So with minimal effort, we've been able to apply a little bit more spacing from our delete button away from our add and edit buttons. And you can see that using style inheritance, or using our based on property to achieve inheritance and be able to inherit styles, not only do we make our styles cleaner, but we make them much easier to maintain and much easier to change the look and feel of multiple elements that look very similar and inherit the same styles.